Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are honored to have our Professional of the Year, Grand Venerable, joining us from Art Molecular Concepts. And if you haven't heard his story yet, haven't met him, you are in for an amazing treat, because Grant is a chemist, an artist, an author, and has so many decades of experience at universities, laboratories, and in executive roles. So we're honored that he joins us once again here today to discuss more about his work. How are you?
Hi, Jill. This is a very simple topic, yet it's a very substantive topic, and I have to kind of angle my brain around it.
Sure.
And so the audience gets reference to what I have to say, because what I have to say is about the most important thing I've ever discussed, and I've discussed some important things. But that's how my classes in chemistry always begin. They I want to get over here, and then I wound up. I get over here. Get my mind a chance here to sort itself out. There's three ways to start what I have to say. I have to use the word anthropology, which is the study of humans. What is a human? I also have to start out with all of the studies of the physical universe, which only involves about 4 academic areas. When you get to the basics, it's physics, chemistry, and mathematics. And then you get in other areas that are related, but they're not usually talked about in the same space. In the same references, and that would be philosophy and religion.
Okay.
Without either one, we could not exist in our little place in the universe. Now, there will be a lot of people who say, "Oh, no, that can't be." But I'm saying it is, and I have a way to loop back to where we left off the last time, which was with a little idea that came along. I'm not going to talk about how we got to that idea, but I'm just going to put this idea out there.
For sure.
Some people, they call it God.
Yeah.
But that idea can have other names. So let me start that way. How have the earliest humans, that's anthropology, how did they stumble on this idea of God? And is it an it? Is it a he? Is it a she? Is it a what? What is it?
Great question.
That's really what my life has been about, is closing in on that area, which was it's always been controversial. It's always been an exciting thing. People get into arguments over that. I'm talking about way back in the 1950s, when I was just a bare teenager in the middle of the 50s, but it was the rage in Europe and in the highest academic circles in the United States to discuss the death of God. That became the popular thing to get into, and it would cause students in their dormitory rooms to stay up late and argue this subject. Well, what proof do you have of God? So that would be the lead-in of the opposers. And I got creamed by many of my dormitory mates at UCLA, who were very, very bright people. But I realized years later they were too smart for their own good, because many of them actually came from a heritage which explored that idea. That heritage was called Judaism.
Wow.
And many of my classmates were of Jewish heritage. Most of them had long ago departed the synagogue and the temple, although their families celebrated high holy days. But it took me years to realize people came at it in a way that nobody could really get their hands around that idea.
Yeah.
And it has to do with attitude. It has to do with what you think you are? Are you better than these people who don't believe in God? All that kind of comes together in a big mishmash. In fact, that sounds like a Hebrew word, the Mishnah. It has to do with the development of the Old Testament of the Bible. Of course, the Jews and the Christians both share that same Old Testament. The Torah is the Old Testament, which the ancient Jews gave us. And I think now so many youngsters of that heritage don't realize how powerful that idea was.
Yeah.
And so I'm up here, my whole memoir, 4 volumes, got me to that place where I could discuss that idea with some comfort and some confidence, even more confidence. Where we left off was what I wanted to explain. How did I do a Doctor of Philosophy dissertation in physical chemistry, chemical physics? How did I achieve that? Well, you could approach that from a number of reference points. You could say, well, I studied hard. Okay, but that doesn't tell you much. But what did I study hard?
True.
And how did I study it? Who was I around when I studied it? I was around classmates and professors who were all imbued in a common heritage out of the old rabbinical doctrines of how do you know something. Well, where did they get that? They got it from the ancient Africans that they were around even longer ago. Now, that's been lost out of the academic circles of the Western world. But there are great scholars in the Western world who could validate that. One was a man named Howard Thurman, who was an African-American theologian who came along in Daytona Beach, Florida, during segregation, racial segregation, from a very poor family. But he developed himself along similar lines that I developed myself. But he wound up as one of the most revered theologians in the country. People of all religious faiths would come, if they had any brains to do that, to sit at Howard Thurman's feet whenever possible and listen to his expositions on how do we get Western religion. So I'm going to just leave that at that. But I happen to have the good fortune to have met Howard Thurman himself when I was a young assistant professor at Cal Poly State University teaching chemistry. Well, my dad had listened to Howard Thurman on the radio, as did maybe half the population of elders in San Luis Obispo County. So when he spoke in 1975 in the United Methodist Church of San Luis Obispo, sponsored by the Unitarian Universalist pastor and his friend, the Methodist pastor, people poured into that church from all over the county. So it was a packed church. How did those people know Howard Thurman to even come in and listen? Because they heard him on the radio. He spoke in such depth, the depths of what the Quakers would call mysticism, the mystical union of God is the whole purpose of being alive in the human body, is to achieve that mystical union. Well, that really gets way out there. But does it have a scientific mathematical basis? So I'm here to tell you that it has the same basis as physics, the principles of chemistry, and the principles of mathematics. How I came to that was really through, well, a few very learned people. One was my doctoral advisor at the University of Chicago, a man who was at that time, well, I was only about 23 or 24 years old when I began to do my studies with him for a dissertation. And he was maybe about 46 or 47 years old, but he had come from birth in Poland across to Canada. He was a Canadian citizen when he joined the University of Chicago. But he came out of that rabbinical tradition of the Talmud.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the Talmud? Talmud. You could put an H on the end if you want to, but it's how to ask questions, to interrogate the unknown.
Okay, yeah.
That started to wake me up when I took my dad to UCLA to the open house in 1962. I was in the class of Professor Kenneth Trueblood, a great Gentile name from New York and England.
Okay.
But Kenneth Trueblood also had sat at the feet of these great scholars in chemistry and physics and math who are from the Talmudic tradition. Nobody talked about it. No one. Jack Halpern did not say, I'm going to teach you today the Talmudic tradition. He just simply led me into it.
Yeah. Okay.
I wished I had talked to him more about its origins.
Mm-hmm.
But Trueblood, in greeting my father, who is this Caltech alumnus, which was such a rare thing. Anyone in Southern California that went to Caltech was just automatically revered in the whole community. And Trueblood said, well, I understand you're a Caltech graduate. And he said, well, I got my PhD from Caltech. So that put them both in this very, use the word sacred, high sacred academic community. First thing he said, Mr. Venerable, I have to tell you, your son asks good questions.
Mm-hmm.
It took me years to figure out what Dr. Trueblood really meant by that. It was the Talmudic method.
Yeah.
I was already learning that at home because my dad thought in that way. It was like that time after that young man, that young innocent Emmett Till was murdered in 1955. He was about 14. I was about 13. And I couldn't believe it when I read about it. And it wasn't really treated in the standard press, but it was in Jet magazine.
Yeah.
Which was a magazine published by the Johnson Publishing Company. It was the only African-American publishing company that published magazines with information about Black heritage and Black events and experiences. But be that as it may, that's how I learned about Emmett's ending in going to his regular visit to his grandparents in Mississippi, his great uncles and great aunts. And he was, he was a young guy and his hormones are starting to kick into his bloodstream. And there's a certain bravado that goes along with that. It seems that his crime that when he went to the local little country store, he whistled at the woman who was at the cash register. And that was considered much too bold for a Black young man to do that. Mm-hmm. So this woman's husband and brother-in-law came and took him in the night. The long and short of that was that he was lynched, and the people were never brought to justice, as we put that.
Yeah.
But that was an input to my upbringing. I was angry as a young teenager to learn of that. So this is where the Talmudic method comes in revealing what kind of man my father was.
Yeah.
Because why don't we just go get a bunch of guns and kill up a bunch of white people in the South, since that's where they all live? Mm-hmm. And my father just looked at me with a calm face. He said, son, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
There's that question, the question of how you interrogate truth. He said, now tell me, you do that, you go there, what do you think the people that you want to shoot are going to do? What will they do? And I just sat there as a youngster and thought for just a few seconds and said, oh, I understand. it wasn't a biggie, but it was. It was a significant piece of learning that also pushed me toward that method of how you ask good questions that get you to another place than you were before you asked the question.
Mm-hmm.
But that is exactly what Professor Halpern did to me when we sat down and reviewed the data that I was collecting on the experiments that I was doing at the Argonne National Laboratory, which was one of the few places in the nation where researchers could work with high energy chemistry using not just cobalt gamma rays, where each ray, each photon has an energy of 2 million electron volts. Now that's a high energy. You could tell just by the word million being in there.
Yeah, right?
But our ordinary visible light that hits us when we walk out into the sunlight, such as red light, it's a lower energy visible light. But the higher energy visible light is blue and violet. And I was working with energies that were ultraviolet.
Okay.
Gamma rays.
Interesting. All right.
Not just 4 electron volts, but 2 million electron volts. Not only that, Argonne had equipment where it could accelerate electrons to an even higher energy in an accelerator we call the LINAC, for linear accelerator. And I could take a little quartz glass tube, and I would have water, very pure water in there, and that water would have cobalt cyanide compounds dissolved in them. And that little tube, that little cell would sit there in the path of this linear accelerator, and it would send these beams through the little quartz cell. But coming through the other direction of the quartz cell was light, visible light, ultraviolet light. But it was that light that would tell me what kind of compound I was working with, and if it was even in existence. So I used used to be called a Polaroid camera. You heard of a Polaroid camera?
Of course, I've had one.
You could take a picture at any time you had it, and it would be, you could keep it in an album.
Yeah.
Well, we used Polaroids all the time back in the day. That was in the 60s. It was even before that. But that's how I discovered a whole new chemical compound, a whole new molecule. And it had a certain electrical charge on it. And it only existed, Jill, for about 5 millionths of 1 second.
Whoa. Oh.
But you could observe
Yeah.
evidence of that compound in this little quartz cell by looking at this oscilloscope screen. An oscilloscope has an oscillating current coming in, an oscillating voltage. And that voltage relates to how the light interacts with my substance in that quartz cell. And it would put it on a screen. There would be a little dot, and that little dot would go up, and it would come down. And when it comes down, it would do that in time. And you would put the time scale you wanted to observe. Like each little delineation would be like maybe so many thousands of a second or so many millions of a second. And that little light, ball of light, it would it appear in there instantly and shoot up on the screen. And then it would very slowly die down on that screen.
Wow.
And that's what the Polaroid camera was for, was to do a time shot. and keep the lens of the camera open while that little ball was going across the screen. So when you look at the finished photograph, you wouldn't see a little ball. You would just see one line where the little ball had been. And you could do calculations on that line. And I could determine that way the speed of the reaction. I could determine the half-life of the little molecule I was observing. Well, it turned out to be the first time that kind of molecule had ever been observed. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but chemists usually work on bench tops, and they take a beaker of one solution and pour it into another. You'd shake it up, and it might change colors, but you could never see, doing it like that on a bench top, all of the millions of possible molecules that existed in there just a short moment before you get a final product over here somewhere. Well, that was important to chemists because it helped society develop industrial processes that we need to exist as a society. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about it is neither Halper nor I could tell what this one little line indicated. Well, is that something new? He'd ask me, is that new or what? He didn't know, but he knew it was something new. But did he blab out and say it's something new? No. That is his way of teaching me Talmudic methodology of putting the question to me.
Yeah.
But he didn't stop there. Mm-hmm. And this is the whole basis of what alchemists did way back in ancient Egypt. He'd come back like 5 days later. He said, now tell me again what you thought that little line meant. I said, I think it may have had something to do with X, Y, and Z. And he says, but I'm not sure. And then he asked me 5 days later. He asked me 5 days later about 5 times until something clicked in my brain and said, oh. I said, oh, there's something else in there. There's something afoot. That he knew there was something afoot. We just didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And so he said, you need to find the spectrum of that, whatever we're looking at on that Polaroid picture. And that's how I got my PhD degree.
Wow.
It was from the oscilloscope pictures of that screen, of this whatever it was, in that cell, that quartz cell. But there was a whole lot of learning behind it that has never left me to this day. It's because of the process of keep asking questions, but you keep getting more precise in what you're asking. Mm-hmm. So if you're teaching students, that's what you're doing to them. You're training them and asking these great questions. So that comes to the whole idea, again, the God idea, that when people in ancient days did their equivalent of looking for hardly existent chemical compounds in an aqueous water solution, that's what they were doing with the scriptures. When the scriptures were set down on scrolls, which became the, what do we call them? They were found in little caves here and there.
Okay.
The Dead Sea Scrolls. You probably heard that name. Everyone somewhere has heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that's when they were found in their little, they were rolled up in rolls of papyrus. Mm. But the writing on the scrolls was done by the early rabbis, starting around 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years before Christ. And that was the whole basis of what later became modern science.
Wow.
And still some rabbis may not believe it because they may not believe science is important as the religion, and that's all right. But it's really what got things kicked off, in which we're still tackling those issues now today. And so these arguments are still going around. Okay, so a lot of people came to believe in whatever God is. And then they started in Europe, they had great fights over it. And that meant that the original church, it split apart into different belief systems about this concept. And then government started getting formed around that. What do you do?
Yeah.
How do you control people when they get really emotional in their disputes about God? What is God? Or does God really exist? We're dealing with that today as we speak. It comes down in terms of political ideologies, but it's the same idea that, okay, how do we settle questions in a civil manner? And we're still learning. We, as a human group across the earth, across nations, we're still learning how to deal with that.
Yeah.
Now, I think that paints the picture of where we are in the United States.
Sure does.
And what are we going to do? How do we deal with education? I mean, there's even suggestions. One side says, well, we don't want to have education the way we've had it.
Mm-hmm.
So, get rid of universities or get rid of their curriculum. They have to be approved of the government. And then the other side says, no, the traditional has worked.
Yeah.
The great universities where I went to school, UCLA, Chicago, and that's how we've developed the technology that we have. Without the ability freely to explore the questions that we need to answer, that's how America stays as great as it's always been. And okay, so where are you, Jill, with your feelings about all of that?
Wait, we're not discussing politics, right?
Well, the question is, how do you not discuss politics?
I know, it's insane.
Anytime you open your mouth,
right?
What does politics mean?
And
in its Greek root, it means that which people talk about.
And then who do you
It's
offend,
from the word for
not
people.
Offend.
The Greek word. Now, is that a question that the rabbis or the psychologists, the philosophers can ask? Is that a human purpose to not offend people? Or is it a better purpose to elevate people and their understanding so that they feel the majesty of their learning and their understanding? Because it'll hurt people when they get over their feelings, but they gain the majesty. That's what takes over.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever people don't approve of, they get over that.
Wow.
So that's who I am.
Well, you are multifaceted. And I hope people tuning in who may not have heard of you now are just like flabbergasted by who is this man? And then they're, looking you up and all your work and all your writings and all your teaching. I mean, but no, you have a lot of knowledge to share, to give. And you have just an amazing backstory and journey of what you've overcome, how you've got here to where you are today. And you continue to educate, and I just love that about you. And I'm learning from you and your teachings. And wow. Yeah. Hold on, Grant. We have to take a quick commercial break here. Can you do me a favor? And we're going to skip that break. Don't worry about it. I just want to give you a second here because we did get a little bit of a late start due to the technical difficulty. So forget about the break. We know who you are. If you guys don't, Grant Venerable, you need to look him up. Pretty amazing what he's doing here and helping so many.
Right.
And what else for today did you want to discuss? Yeah, let's continue.
So did you want me to refer to some of the other things?
Yeah. What else did you want to make sure that we cover in our show for today? I mean, there's always so much.
Well, that would be the memoir.
Perfect.
The memoir. In total, it's probably about 2,000. It may be 2,000 pages.
Wow.
But it's in digitized form.
Okay.
And it contains photographs. There's photographs of my artwork in there. In other words, what does a molecule look like if you were the size of an electron and drew a picture of a molecule that you as an electron are a part of? So that's an issue I take up, that I challenge my students to understand. Why would I put such a thing in front of them in a lecture? Because they get so darned excited about it. That's why. Because their eyes get really big and they get thrilled. Oh, look at that. It's a picture. It's a painting of a molecule.
Yeah.
Where what we touched on before was Ray Bradbury, who authored Fahrenheit 451, a science fiction novel. But it was illustrated by this artist, Joseph Maniani, a native-born Italian who was living in Los Angeles. He was about maybe 55 years old when I was a almost 15 years old guy in Los Angeles. And I think I'd mentioned I got a scholarship with maybe 30 other youngsters. PTA scholarship to go to that art institute. It was then called the Los Angeles County Art Institute, and then it took on its new name, the Otis Los Angeles County Art Institute. So that's where I learned oil painting technique.
Yep.
And wondered, this is a beautiful technique. I don't see anything uncalled. I even talked about that we had nude models to learn the art of the human body, and how Maniani was so confident that we youngsters were mature enough as teenagers to learn how to do that kind of art. And we were mature enough to do that.
Yeah.
But what I learned in UCLA was where I was called to finally apply it, namely to the portrait of an atom and a molecule.
Wow.
And how to show what the electrons are doing in that molecule that like holds an oxygen atom together with a little hydrogen atom and you have water, H2O.
Yep.
And that's in volume 1, is the theory that I developed behind why that works for mastering advanced subjects like chemistry, like physics, like mathematics. The assignment that I have given to students was, I want you to explain the structure of water. But I first want you, or maybe I'll say, just write a paragraph on the structure of water. But then I'd say, draw a picture of water that incorporates the theory of the bonding between the oxygen atom and the 2 hydrogen atoms that are in water. That was a whole different idea that came into existence, that went into a different part of the brain, if I could put it like that, that caused students to learn more deeply what the water structure really is, and to be able to make predictions about what water can do. One of the most fabulous subjects in the universe. I was thinking about it yesterday because I wore a tie that had OHs all down the tie, different colors of O with a line to an H. Well, that's what we call a hydroxyl group,
Yeah.
hydrogen, oxygen. And then you can have an OO, oxygen. You can have H, two H's on an O. That's another one. But it brings out the student to the awareness, the consciousness that there's deeper meanings to the question than just saying a didactic. That word didactic, it means a very dry academic exploration of the water molecule. And it goes into things like poetry, psychology, whatever the learner is interested in their own personal lives.
Yeah.
That's what they tap by exploring something in chemistry or something in physics, which is why I started usually every lecture with a reading of poetry from, and the one I was thinking about just a week ago was Stephen Crane, where he said, a man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist. However," said the universe, "that reply does not call up in me any sense of obligation."
Yep.
It really meant that it just is. You exist. You are. You're important. That little molecule's important. That shows the universality of all subjects relative to each other. And if you cut off any one, you have minimized other subjects in the curriculum.
Wow.
So that there was a whole different, I know what it was. Because when you bring in subjects like what we keep separate from what we call the secular curriculum, which has no presumed God idea in it, it elevates that to something new and different. Namely, say bring in the Gospel of John, which is in the New Testament. I think I mentioned that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I've listened to that verse forever. I said, what does that mean? What does it really mean? Until I looked up the original origins of Word. And it's translated into Word because that's what we know in English. But it came from the Greek, the logos. But in the Greek, it means something much deeper. It means the narrative. It means how we explain it to ourselves. And so as long as people have a narrative for their highest purpose, their highest priorities in their existence, that's God. That is God. And no one can take that away from you. Because if there's 8 billion individual distinct people on this planet, that means there's 8 individual distinct narratives. And no one can say which narrative is the right narrative because all of them are right in terms of the individual. That's why freedom is so important. It's because we have to live our own individual callings of what our purpose is. Now, I see you there fulfilling your purpose is to
I'm a great listener. And oh my goodness.
Interesting people.
I get to meet interesting people like you every day. Yes.
And you know, that's divine truth when you get down to it, is to be able to do it, because that's what gives your life such rich purpose. And it's why I like to talk to distinctive, different people and get them excited about who they are.
Same here. I mean, it is exciting to get to learn to meet. This world is so big, yet, as you know, so small. How we're all connected, right? And you being in
That's
science,
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know your views on that, but it's so true. There's so much more to the world than what we see, what we do, and I just believe in what's beyond, and I cannot wait. Whether you call it heaven, whether you call it spirituality, the other side, however belief, but there's something. Life is just so beautiful, and there has to be more. I'm a firm believer in this.
Our words are so vital to help us get to that.
Yeah.
Because we can misuse words, or we can elevate ourselves and others with the words we choose to use.
Yeah. Well, do you have any regrets in life? Is there anything out there you haven't done that you've yet to do? You seem like you've so fulfilled, you've done so much.
That's an interesting question, because I did not choose some of the important things that most people choose to do. And one of those is marriage, which is everything for most people. But I had to feel a calling. That's how I got to that. Once I got to my first job, I said, I've got things to do to explain the universe, that the part that enriches human life. And I had to make some practical decisions about my time, the use of my time. Did that mean I was not attracted to people I wanted to be around? No, that's not what it meant. It just meant that there were traditional practices and habits that, say, the majority of people participated in. That I said, well, I'll choose not to do that, or at least not in that way. So that would be one answer to the questions. Anything I have not done, but I have had relationships, so that's an important priority among human beings. I don't repair automobiles.
Can't do that either. And I've never been married myself. Yeah, I can only do so much.
I tend to be that one person in a whole extended family that can tell the youngsters in the family where they came from. Where did their ancestors come from?
Yeah.
Because I learned from the older people who knew that in my big extended family. So it's not just a book about chemistry, physics, and philosophy and religion and all. It's a book on my family. So any reader that wants to know what produced a guy like that, it's the answers among my ancestors. Like, I know the birthdays of all the important ancestors, and I'll call my sister or brother, and I say, it's Cousin Zephyr's 140th birthday today.
Right.
And she was a revered elder in St. Louis who taught high school way back then. And then my aunt. So I always connect certain days of the year with birthdays of revered elders. The music that's performed in church becomes a part of my memory of ancestors and elders. So that helps me put the whole picture together, just why music is so important to me, why I got connected to the performance of piano and organ at such an early stage in my life. Now, I did not achieve violin. My father did give me violin lessons, but I never took to violin. But I took to piano and the organ.
Wow. Fascinating.
Although some of my favorite pieces are violin concertos
Really?
and pieces like that. And if you listen to some of the Paganini's, like there's the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, and you hear
Mm-hmm.
key instruments of that, and then Vivaldi and the Seasons, and there's so many string instruments in
Wow.
that. So what did that mean? It meant I was taken a lot to classical recitals in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
You ever been to the Shrine Auditorium,
No,
Jill?
never, no.
I mean, that is one of the biggest spaces in the whole world.
Really?
You go in, it holds something like 6,000 people.
Wow.
And there's been more Academy Awards given away in the Shrine Auditorium, which was just a mile from my house
Oh my
where I
gosh,
grew up.
really?
And there was a composer named William Grant Still who actually lived in our neighborhood. He was born in 1895, but he composed fine symphonic works. And his most famous work, you hear a lot today performed by United States symphonies called the Afro-American Symphony. But as you might imagine, as a combo, there's kind of jazz melodies in it as well as European style music. And so it's a powerful piece. So I put that out to the viewers and the listeners. Go get a DVD of the William Grant Still Afro-American Symphony, and it will just carry your heart up into a heavenly space.
Beautiful. Well, we are almost out of time. What else? How do we sum up today? I mean, always. I mean, you are always full of. And what is next for you? I mean, really. Here's your summer. Do you have any plans for this summer? Is it work?
The summer, I think I'm going to finish unpacking my boxes, filling
tell
my
me that's right.
apartment. The only thing I'd like to get to later is I live in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's the desert, the high desert of
Where
Southern California.
specifically? I was going to say, for people that don't know. Not
29.
that we're going to come stalk your house, but tell us.
Well, it's the area of Yucca Valley.
Yeah.
It's where the biggest U.S. Marine base in the world is situated. And the mountains are just beyond imagination and their beauty. And the Milky Way at night is beyond imagination. But that is where the whole idea of God started. So I think that's a good wrap up.
I think
That
so.
living here is giving me the experience that the ancient Africans in Chad, by Lake Chad, and then it migrated into ancient Palestine. It's where they captured the idea of God as nameless. It's like this is something that doesn't even exist, but we know it's there.
Yeah.
Because we feel it in our lives. And you can't paint it because it doesn't have an appearance.
No.
So you do other things in the Renaissance to make art.
No.
But it came out of the desert. Why? That's the question I'd like to leave the audience with. Why the desert? It could be a simple chemical explanation. Papyrus lasts longer in a dry environment than it does in a wetter environment where you have rain and you have lakes and rivers. But in the desert, Dead Sea Scrolls they stay intact.
No.
They get a little cranky here and there, but they stay intact.
Beautiful.
So I go swim every other day.
All right.
The
You're going
pool's
to
kind of in a
unpack. Okay. What else?
high area where you could see all these mountains around the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And the tallest mountains are over 11,000 feet. And they're like Sierra-sized mountains that surround Southern California. But you have to go north to hit the Sierras, which is a whole range of high mountains.
Wow.
So probably I'll be doing a lot of reunionizing with relatives who live a lot in the Southern California. And, there's younger generations of those. My eldest first cousins are in their late 90s. But they have great grandchildren and great great grandchildren who are like just a few years old. Amazing. And there's a lot of stories to pass along to those youngsters. So that's one of my jobs.
Sure is. Well, enjoy and unpacking. When did you officially move?
I left Georgia on the 18th of April and got here the 21st of April without starting, and with 2 kitties in the kitty motel on the back seat of the car. So they arrived safe and sound.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. So if someone wants to reach out to you, Grant, how do we do so?
Probably the email address is the best, VENTWO@AOL.com. And also through my website, which is Grant, all lowercase, Grant D. Venerable PhD without dots.com.
Beautiful.
And that brings up a whole lot more of interest.
Sure it does. All right. Thank you so much. You have a fantastic day, and looking forward to the next time we get to connect. Always a pleasure, sweetheart. Thank you. Okay. Have a great day,
Jill.
Grant. Thank you. And to everyone, stay tuned. We'll be back with more. And congratulations again on being our Professional of the Year. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her.
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge.
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! It's now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend.
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.